When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
Time travel is everywhere, and it's genuinely not hard to understand why. It's not only a very interesting science fiction trope, but also a natural human curiosity. As a result, the trend has been utilized in games, movies, and books. Whether it be traveling back to the past to stop yourself from doing something really embarrassing, or traveling to the future to see how things have fallen apart or gotten better, time travel is something I think we're all familiar with. But, well, I don't like time travel. Well, I do like the idea of time travel because it's cool in theory, but in execution, it's rarely utilized well. Nonetheless, writers, filmmakers, and creators all return to this idea to tell a story. Why? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, because I think it'd make an interesting discussion to have, and it just so happens that a recent movie uses time travel, and maybe we could talk about the failings and gains of it by talking about its inspirations, and how those can create an interesting relationship with how we, as people, understand our past.
Think of it like a movie. You can pause, rewind, or slow down.
But before we dive into the media itself, I think it's really clear to understand why the concept of time travel itself is so unintuitive to the writing process.
No, that's all in the past. You mean the future? Whatever!
Here's basic plot structure. We're all familiar with this, right? Rising action, climax, resolution. In storytelling, the story is a series of events that lead up to something. But if you change one of these past events, does that rising action still exist? If the past events that created the drama don't exist anymore, does the drama itself still exist? As an extension, well-crafted characters have understandable motivations and desires, traits that normally foster from past experiences, and these experiences are what cause the audience to empathize and relate to the character, or at very least understand them. And it's the catharsis of seeing the character undergo a journey that they come out the other side informed by everything that happened in a plot is in good storytelling what we call character growth. But time travel begins to blur the lines and flub those beats a little bit. In several ways, it actually makes a story about the destination, not the journey, because a character who time travels might be fundamentally different than how they started, in a way erasing the character who the audience has come to know and understand. Don't get me wrong, there are good stories that don't follow traditional character and story structure. Writing can take any form, and any and all rules are pointless and important. It just means that writers need to focus in on what makes time travel in the context of their story mean. And honestly, I don't think many writers actually bother trying to put that much effort into refining their own version of time travel. And simply, it's because time travel is difficult to understand because it's not real. Which is why it doesn't make any sense for movies to have some sort of intellectual superiority on the subject. I know nothing about quantum physics, but I know that it doesn't work like most movies would like it to. But because the concept itself is so amorphous, it seems that most writers focus so hard on how time travel logically works, rather than focusing on what truly matters, on how it's thematically resonant to the story.
Imagine that this line represents time.
This world, this history, infinitely branches off as a result of momentary decisions. Shift is the phenomenon which allows us to send our consciousnesses to them.
The argon. Wait, which one is that?
The blue one.
Blue one. I weighed it at 77 grams.
Because that's how all storytelling works, but sci-fi uses a step past hard science to fit into a theme. Frankenstein is about our hatred towards our creator, whether it be God or a human using galvanism. Star Trek uses space travel and aliens as a way to push boundaries on what it means to be a person, or throw shade at xenophobia and racism. Or even something as simple as WALL-E uses the dystopian future to illuminate themes of environmentalism. Now, is all this media perfect parallels and allegory? No, but the intention is there. And that's something I don't see happen in a lot of time travel stories. A lot of time travel stories overlay the concept to carry their plot-focused narrative. So nearly all time travel stories depict time travel as something uncontrollable and destructive to create conflict. Examples like Life is Strange, The Butterfly Effect, Primer, Doctor Strange, Zero Escape Trilogy, The Flash, and A Wrinkle in Time, just to name a few. But heck, even the biggest name, Back to the Future, their second and third movie embraces this destructive force of time just as much. There isn't that next step to weave the science fiction into the narrative, save for plot beats, so it's very rarely thematically resonant. And even if the characters are good and maybe the plot is interesting, it means the genre fiction itself is a bit lacking, which is pretty important, because notice I didn't say Back to the Future 1, because honestly Back to the Future 1 might be the prime utilization of a story to the best they can do to execute a time travel narrative. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Back to the Future is a perfect movie. It definitely has not aged well in some ways, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean we can't learn something about how it approaches telling a believable and cohesive story with time travel, because quite basically, it actually makes a case for time travel. It actually says that the ability of time travel is not entirely a bad thing and can yield good results. First off, Back to the Future's structure is designed so Marty, our time traveler, is more our lens rather than our protagonist. Instead, George is the hero who needs to grow and is the carrier of the drama. Even though Marty is the one mostly on screen, his dramatic stakes nearly solely resides in George's ability to confront his insecurities, thus getting rid of the dissonance between directly editing his past and conflicting with the plot. And as just characters, Marty knows what his dad needs to learn.
Did it ever occur to you to say no? I mean, just once, say no. Look, son, I know it's hard for you to understand, but the fact is, I'm not a fighter.
And while that is a deleted scene, it's more just subtext for this scene later.
That's why we gotta show her that you, George McFly, are a fighter. You're somebody who's gonna stand up for yourself, somebody who's gonna protect her.
And even speaking a bit more abstractly, Marty getting hit by the car instead of George prevents their relationship from having a very weak foundation. From just their first table scene to how they interact shows just how flawed their marriage is.
He seems so helpless, like a little lost puppy, and my heart just went out to him.
Yeah, Mom, we know. You've told us this story a million times. You felt sorry for him, so you...
George is detached and aloof, and Lorraine is absorbed in the past. But by interfering with history, Marty disrupts time, but for a better result in a healthier relationship. And while both versions aren't perfect, the one where George punches out an attempted assaulter in Biff is much better. I don't want to turn this into a Back to the Future video, but I hope you're getting my point. Time travel in Back to the Future 1 is not a bad thing. It can cause bad things to happen, but ultimately Marty's trip to the past only yielded good results. And probably more important, the usage of time travel is thematically relevant. The film treats time travel, well, how Doc Brown explains it.
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Like I said, time travel is not real. There are no rules, so when every film utilizes the butterfly effect, it always leads to the same type of story, and it feels completely contrary to why we even bother telling the story. Why tinker with this concept if you're ultimately going to say it is dangerous and shouldn't be messed with? Time travel isn't a death note. You're not just straight up killing people. Going back in time to stop that time you peed your pants at school isn't going to make the world implode. Or, at very least, it shouldn't.
This is a time turner, Harry. McGonagall gave it to me first term. This is how I've been getting to my lessons all year.
You mean we've gone back in time?
Yes. Dumbledore obviously wanted us to return to this moment. Clearly something happened he wants us to change.
And I'm not saying there aren't good narratives here about accepting your past and your mistakes. And while this might seem like a lesson in semantics, in a time travel story, an important word differential is to make the difference between a character's mistakes and regrets. Mistakes are the things a character grows and learns from. They are essential for good character growth and a satisfying arc. On the other hand, regret is the thing a character would go back and change. This is something that they wished never happened.
That's why I'm not talking right now about some girl I saw at about 20 years ago and how I always regretted not going over and talking to her. I don't regret the 18 years I was married to Nancy. I don't regret the 6 years I had to give up counseling when she got sick. And I don't regret the last years when she got really sick. And I sure as hell don't regret missing the damn game. That's regret.
And it's the reflection and concept of that regret is why we keep coming back to time travel. Surprisingly, the movie The Butterfly Effect with Ashton Kutcher does an okay performance with this. Every time Evan goes back in time and changes something, he never truly creates a horrible universe, just one that is flawed in its own way. Some are worse for him, and some are better for him. He does do reflection to understand and grow as a character through time travel, and the conflict initially becomes his ability to accept that any of his possible futures have flaws. But it still ultimately betrays its own theme, the lasting repercussions of trauma, by having Evan just undo it all in the end with just one final trip. Life is Strange Season 1 approaches time travel in a similar manner, with the protagonist Max going back in time for a variety of reasons, from mundane conversation to saving her best friend's life, except the focus is specifically utilizing a feminist lens and attempting to interrogate blatant and hidden sexism. In a very clever way, the problems the girls face in the game can't just be fixed by Max undoing one event, illuminating that sexism isn't just for one specific person, it is ingrained in our culture. And though the game's ending is up to the player, both endings can be seen as understanding the past to make a better future. And seriously, how could I not mention everyone's time-traveling doctor? And believe me, there is a lot to unpack, but for this video I will just pick the episode from Matt Smith's run about Van Gogh, where the Doctor and Amy attempt to prevent Van Gogh's suicide by showing him his futural impact. But ultimately, Van Gogh's fate is locked, and while this initially upsets Amy, the Doctor has some choice words of condolences.
I see every life is a pile of good things and bad things. Hey, the good things don't always soften the bad things, but vice versa. The bad things don't necessarily spoil the good things or make them unimportant. And we definitely added to his pile of good things.
Which is a very good way of understanding this mindset around time travel. It doesn't have to be the world-altering force, it doesn't have to be the butterfly effect, and it sure doesn't have to be a bad thing. Because the rules are made up by the author, and it ultimately depends on the story that's being told and how it fits into that narrative. I know it's an interesting thing to think about, and by all means, I find it fascinating too. But sci-fi is ultimately about unlocking an answer to the human condition through science. Whether that answer be a character has to grow and accept something as fact, or risk their status quo by finally being given a chance to change an event that scarred their life. Because time travel is ultimately the embodiment of reflection, looking back and understanding how the events that shaped our lives could have been different. There are things that are bigger than us as individuals, constants that need to be understood and owned up to. But the past isn't useless, and albeit time travel is a bit more metaphorical, the usage of the past to change the future is a very healthy mindset to promote humanity's relationship to our failings, and how we can actively promote against them, thus making an actual argument for using time travel to understand ourselves better in the present. Or maybe it's something completely different. This is honestly just what I think. Because even lighter things like Chrono Trigger's time-traveling cast and RPG crew is just as valuable as the Magic Tree House teaching children lessons in history. Both are simple, yet also worthy of acknowledgement. So let me know what you think. But for now, that's all I got. Thank you for watching and sharing this with your friends, and I'll see you next time.